And we're gonna check on the sound. Hope you all are having a beautiful day. Come over here to my sound machine. Sounds good. All right. Whew. Excited for a new design day. I like to mute my phone so it's not making buzzing noises throughout the show. Whew. All right, let me check out my cameras. See, everything is aligned. Paper, pens, keyboard, computer, everything's in alignment. This is perfect. All right. Another day, another board game design stream. So happy to have you with me today. Had a few interesting weeks board game design wise. Last week in particular, we got very meta, maybe just a little bit loopy with the what is the meaning of fun? And fun, what was it? What did we come up with together? I think it was primal fun versus cerebral satisfaction, and the different actions that can generate different types of fun within a game playing experience. So, might end up in that direction again today. Remains to be seen. Potentially make something a little more, bring it a little bit back to mechanical. Although the mechanic that we did come up last week with the rolling of the bits and tracing out the shape based on how the pieces fall. I think there's a lot of fun stuff to be generated around that concept. Just playing with bits in new and interesting ways. A lot of the games I've been designing professionally recently, it's a lot of pretty strategic stuff, very card-based. It's always fun to take a step back, especially on a show like this and in a space where I'm trying to get flow of ideas and creativity to think, what else could there be? You know, it doesn't have to be cards and cubes and meeples, doesn't have to be worker placement all the time, although it can be. It can be whatever you want it to be. So let's see, last week we started our brainstorm mind map with the word fun. A couple of other recent ones, I think we had Star recently and Dinosaur, of course, when we came up with the Truth of Science game that I'm still working on. There's some cool concepts in that design idea that we discussed at length. I don't know, what do we want to start with today? It's very nice here in Seattle. It's been warm after staying cold for way too long. It's sunny. It's a cool, crisp breeze. Could potentially start thinking about weather. Weather could be an interesting concept to start from. Weather seasons. Seasons is a cool concept as well. I think some games that explore different seasons is a very evocative concept. Something that I give a lot of consideration to. I feel very in tune with the weather and the way that weather, seasons, nature changes over time. I think it's a good word to start with today. Seasons. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, looking at my blank piece of paper here where I'm writing words and wondering how exactly does this relate back to board game design. The concept behind the show is to start with some words, make a mind map, what ideas does the central concept inspire, going out from the different nodes, really trying to come up with some creative concepts that aren't necessarily on the tip of your tongue, right? Digging into that vast primal animal brain, digging into the subconscious and seeing what kinds of things emerge. Sounds a little dark. Sounds like aliens or something when you put it that way. Seasons. So we have summer. We start off just by naming the different seasons. Could be in the same node, but I'm just going to draw them all on the bottom here. There's 1/2 of the mind map. Summer, autumn, or fall. Curve around down here. Get fall in there with its falling leaves, changing leaf colors. Each of the seasons have very evocative pictures, themes, emotions even that go along with them. In our modern age, a lot of times if we even notice the seasons, we have a lot of tools, tips, and techniques that make it so we don't have to experience the seasons in the same way. We can get food, fresh fruits and vegetables any time of the year, so it's not really a big deal. We have heated cars, cooled homes, we have jackets, we have things to protect us and insulate us from the changing of the seasons. But if you actually stop to look and observe the changes, I think part of it is there's a spectrum. I think I'm going to put the word spectrum right in here. There's a spectrum. I'm usually a good speller. I don't know when I'm writing. I think I just don't write enough in pen. When I start writing things physically as opposed to typing, I think I rely on autocomplete too much. Anyways, there's a spectrum of experiences and emotions, right? Experience and emotion. Hello, Senor Bob. Birth, life, and death. I think that's something that often we like to insulate ourselves from. It's not just the weather, it's changes in general, and some of them feel very good and very positive, right? People have different experiences with the seasons, so I'm not going to say that these feelings or emotions apply to everybody, but for the typical feelings, emotions associated with the specific seasons, spring, birth, rejuvenation, things are green, the leaves are coming back on the trees. If you have allergies, it can be the worst season. But if not, a lot of people are coming outside for the first time in a long time, so it can be like very positive and energetic. And as that fades into summer, often in this northern hemisphere, right? Because seasons and different things, like in Australia, Christmas is in the middle of summer, so it can get a little bit weird. But for me, where I am, how I experience the seasons, summer is slowing down, it's warmer, maturation, a lot of things are coming to fruit, right? Actual fruit. And this idea of plans, things are coming to fruition, which is very positive and powerful. You have very long days, but with that comes a little bit of the promise of the decline. Every time, if you're looking too far into the future, you can always see a point where this won't be around forever. So you come all the way back to fall. Fall is very much this nostalgia, this a sense of longing, like things are coming to a close, things are coming to an end. They're not there yet, but you can see the writing on the wall. So it can be a very poignant season. And then winter, of course, season of darkness, of death. My mom is from the north of Norway, where there's times, not quite where she is, but a little farther north, it's dark for days, if not weeks or months at a time in the middle of winter. So it's very much, things aren't living, the leaves fall off the trees, it's cold. But there's some positive things associated with that as well. Coziness, hunkering down, creating, there's a lot of holidays and festivals and things within winter to kind of ease this darkness and loneliness. Australia is just a mirror world. Yeah, I know, right? I heard something really funny the other day. Not entirely related, but on the meme of what is and isn't a sandwich, someone in Australia, and whatever's just directly opposite, I don't know if that's us exactly, but they put 2 pieces of bread on the ground and made an earth sandwich. That's kind of cool. The water in the toilets goes backwards from what I've heard. I haven't been to Australia before, but I really want to because it seems like a pretty cool place, except for the bugs and snakes and sharks and stuff. All right, so right off the bat from this mind mapping, we're getting a lot of very evocative symbology. Evocative symbology, change, evolution, cycles, I think is a very important concept here. And in the games that you play, looking at 2 different styles of games, sometimes people use the system of seasons and the seasonal cycle very mechanically or very evocatively to make a really... It's a great thing, it's a great tool to apply because it has a lot of meaning to people. So you can put it in there and right away you get this idea of cycles, like there's 3 seasons in a game or there's 4 seasons in a game. Viticulture does this where you work through the different seasons over the course of a year. Kodama, I think, has season cards that affect the scoring for each round. So in games where you're looking for something that really evokes the idea of cycles, it can be a powerful tool. A lot of other games, though, kind of ignore, even if they're set in a real world, they ignore seasons, or they want to pretend, like within the magic circle of the game, they want to not have to worry about change or effect on the world. So something, and I have to remember my games very specifically here, something like Concordia, for example, you are moving through a world, you're moving across a map, but you don't ever have to deal with actual effects of seasons. So you have the seasons, you have their emotional resonance, and I guess I would say cultural significance. And then you also have the very real world effects of these seasons. So summer, heat. Oh my gosh. Don't Starve uses this in a very powerful way. I think it's one of the few games, although I haven't played too many other roguelike survival games, so they might use seasons as well, but I think it's one of the most powerful examples of using seasons mechanically in a game. Because in winter you can freeze to death. The game's all about dying. You can die very easily by freezing. In summer there's heat, the wolves that chase after you can be on fire, and things can just randomly burst into flames. And then autumn and spring are generally, I think there could be more rain in those seasons, which is a problem for me because I always play as the robot that get struck by lightning. But in general, they're like a little less difficult to navigate. But there's certain real world consequences that you can play around with mechanically. Fall, rain, winter, cold, weather. I guess maybe like tornadoes or hurricanes or something. Other leaves falling. Oh, the game seasons. I actually don't know too much about that. Seasons board game. Tactical game of cards and dice which take places in 2 phases. Nice. Ooh, and they have like a online version as well. Cool, I'll have to check that out a little bit more because I'm definitely interested in this. The concept of seasons and the different ways that you can play around with it. So, talked about a few ways that people generally, mechanically or flavor-wise, use seasons. So you can use it for determining cycles or making cycles very evident for people, like a better reason for cycles. If you want to split your game into 3 or 4 parts, you don't have to do all the seasons I've seen, or 2, summer, winter, spring, summer, fall, or all 4 seasons. If you want to break your game into sections and it in some way relates to the natural world, then you can make cycles make more sense in a game. It doesn't have to. It's like, this is a game about trees. We go over 4 phases because that is the best gameplay. Is fine, but having an evocative anchor for that reason can be very powerful. So cycles, weather effects, like I mentioned in Don't Starve, the seasons are used very effectively to make actually weather effects, and now let's say world changes. Because the world does change a lot from season to season. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, there's a lot of things we do to negate the effects. But if you're in, for example, a post-apocalyptic world, it can be a lot more evident if you're in a historical context. The impact of the seasons can be a lot more meaningful. But all throughout history, weather was a huge thing. Like the season, whether it was a good crop year, the flooding of the Nile on a regular seasonal basis, typhoons and other seasonal storms, seasonal flooding. Again, it's not something in our modern day world that we necessarily worry about, although there's still black ice, there's still a lot of people losing power over the winter, heat waves, and more devastating weather-related effects. But in general, you're kind of like, do I need to wear a jacket or not? There's ways to mitigate this. But in other contexts, not as mitigatable, more impactful, I guess I would say, to the general world. Senior Bob says, I've seen a few video games where the seasons are manipulated to solve environmental puzzles. So like a time thing? Moving through time. Like, that sounds like a pretty cool application of time. Marker of time. This goes back to the idea of cycles as well. So the passing of time, if you have the manipulation of time, in one time you might be going to a place where everything's covered with snow. You can't see into the rocks where there might be a code. On another one, the snow could be good because you move forward in time to see footprints in the snow that you might not be able to see, so you can see the direction that someone is going. Time manipulation. I think another cool thing is cultural, religion, ritual. Because a lot of the first religions and very much spirituality was very tied to the seasons, and like we talk about historical contexts where weather could really determine a lot of survivability, a lot of whether you were having a very good time or a very bad time as a civilization or a culture. If you think back to prehistory, it's even more so, before predictions, before other mitigation effects. A snowstorm or too long of a winter could totally wipe out your entire civilization. So a lot of the rituals grew up around doing certain things in the spring to ask for a good spring, to ask for good herd migrations. So there's a lot of ritualistic type things that you can do based on seasonal signals. So certain things like the sprouting of the first of a particular type of flower. So here, for me, I really like daffodils. And so when I start to see daffodils, it's it's a sign that spring is coming. So they're a pretty early spring flower. It could be the first blossoms on a fruit tree. You could be seeing the young, because a lot of animals give birth in the spring. I believe that's correct. Seasonal signals. That's what Bambi taught me, okay? Baby animals are born in the spring. I don't know how scientifically accurate that is. Flowers. Animals in spring. And then on the other end, knowing when it's the right time, when it was very important to gather as much food as possible in the fall. Watching for animals going into hibernation, certain nuts falling from the trees, certain harvests, weather changes, freezing of water, those kind of things. So back to the environmental puzzles solved by seasons. If an entrance is covered in ice, you can change the season to spring to thaw it out. Less cyclical, I guess. Yeah, that makes sense. Ooh, solstices and equinoxes. Yeah. Moving forward from prehistory, if you're looking at a lot of the first polytheistic religions that were a little more structured, the solstice, am I going to spell this right? Solstices and equinoxes, which I believe are the longest and shortest days. So this is something that you could track even a very long time ago, like the length. Like you could have either light shining onto a cave wall or have a sundial. It's like I haven't used this word in forever. What is that? Use a sundial or different things. Some people say that different stone structures and monuments were used specifically for this purpose, for ritual purposes, but also for tracking time, because it could be very important. We have calendars now, so you're like, oh, in December it's going to be winter. Like, I know that. But if I didn't have a calendar to tell me how many days, like counting down, it could be a lot more difficult. Game biologist. Bird nookie in the spring equals baby birds in the spring. Mammal nookie in the fall is baby mammals in the spring. I'm glad this is a game biologist telling this. Seems like a perfect fit for your unique style of information. But that makes sense, because bears hibernate. Other animals that don't necessarily hibernate are definitely a lot less active over the course of the winter, and that's a good time because mammals take a long time to gestate. When you if you can store up your food and have that time, there's not a lot you can do. It's not really safe to go out, so it's a good time to get to work baking those babies. And again, this comes back to the cycles, birth, life, and death, as Senor Baub mentioned. All right, so we're talking a lot about seasons, talking a lot about games that implement I'm going to stop myself right here because it's something that's been on my mind lately. Something that's not quite theme, not quite mechanics, but this third category driving the game experience or the game play. Not sure yet what exactly to call this category. I want to find out a good name for it, because for Kodama, for example, the theme is trees and nature and growing a tree. Seasons is kind of a sub-theme within that, but it's kind of straddles the gap between mechanics and theme. I think that's a good way to put it. So, mechanized theme within the sphere of theme. It's something that you can use in a very mechanical way, which is cool. I would say the same thing for viticulture. It's about growing grapes. As someone growing crops, seasons are very relevant, but I wouldn't say that the theme of the game is seasons. So that's something I'm going to have to think about a little bit. But anyways, we've been talking about using seasons mechanically, using seasons thematically. Where does that come to for us? We are here trying to come up with a new game concept. So some of the more specific things we had mentioned were the animals breeding. Animals breeding. I like trying to make 2 letters become 1 because it seems like a more efficient way of writing. Maybe in the future we'll be able to read something where that's an LS. This. It says animals. Oh my gosh. I'm going to create my own alphabet. Aspirations. Future aspirations. Alright, so we talked about animals breeding, plants flowering, different seasons globally, because we are on a globe and things change depending on how you're pointed towards the sun. Different seasons globally, cycles of changing seasons. The mechanical idea of taking seasons and changing the season. I like how it's done in video games. I wonder if puzzle of season change. I wonder if that's something that could be implemented from a board game perspective with like a flipping over of boards. I think trying to remember now. I can't think off the top of my head. I feel like I've seen boards that change seasonally, but it could be something where you have the summer board. A lot of games use different cards, Viticulture and Kodama, based on the season. But if you had actual separate boards or a flippable board, which is interesting because in a lot of games you're building up a board state towards the end of the game. But if you have one where you build up this board state, and this could be the map during summer, just imagining an actual routes or trails across the board if it's a physical movement sort of game. And then you do all your stuff over the cycle of the season of summer, and then come winter, maybe some of these connections or paths or options could be disconnected or blocked off because of snow. So that's an interesting mechanical idea. Plant nookie in the spring is baby plants in the summer. Depends. Plants are weird. Plants... Because I guess like a tree will make a nut or a seed, right? And the seed will fall and might sprout in the spring whenever the plants would tend to sprout. With bulbs like tulips or daffodils, I think they have an underground network where the bulbs are like potatoes that grow from there because they don't necessarily go from seeds. And a lot of plants, whenever they flower, because things flower throughout spring and summer, and they drop their seeds and then makes a new plant that flowers again in that season. Peter, animals breeding with plants. Yeah, that's definitely... I think I need a new page to encapsulate this grand new concept that we're coming up with. Okay, I mean, it sounds a little weird, but now that I'm thinking of it, like cat flower. Oh my gosh, that's actually kind of cute. Limited by my drawing skills, but like the leaves are little paws. And then it has little like down leaves that are paws, little cat flower. I should draw the cat first to make sure it's visible. With all the petals around its head like a lion. And then it has little paws, little cat feet. That's an idea. Very off the the grid or off this idea of seasons that we're talking about, unless there's like you have to cross over the seasons. Animal, plant, to make sure that you have the right mating seasons for your creations. I'm going to start taking some notes for these excellent ideas. Animal, plant mating, need to have overlapping seasons for correct mating. I would say, is there, like, just, I mean, this is a little bit out there, but is there just an animal mating or breeding game that's seasonal? That's a good question. I'll have to look that up afterwards. Animal mating, breeding game that depends on seasons. Could be a little out there, but it's science, right? Science is great. Animals breeding with plants are lichens. Is a lichen like neither an animal or plant? Flippable season tiles would be cool. Coming back, we're kind of jumping around a little bit here, but what I like about this concept, and could be tricky from a mechanical standpoint, is often, as I mentioned, a lot of the experience of a game is building up over the course of the whole game. And just the fact that you can see the curve and see the arc and how things are. So this would almost be, I forget if it came out, I haven't played the final version of Jaws, but I did play test at a point where the board was actually flippable. So you like started going after Jaws and then you were fighting Jaws. So at this point it becomes potentially two separate games. So the question of how exactly you tie those two games together can be a little bit tricky. So if you were, looking over time, evolution of the board state, where you're like, oh, I'm putting some resources in here. I'm like, I have a tree, I'm growing some apples, whatever you want it to be. And then over the end of the summer, it's like, oh, I've got a lot of apple trees now. Obviously, I didn't grow them all. Maybe I bought an orchard from someone or something. And we have like a bunch of carts and stuff. And then so you're setting up the board and then removing things from the board. I've seen this kind of elegant, like, crest of the curve and then denouement, where at the end of the summer season, pretty much everything is gone from the board. Or just one big dramatic moment where you've set up this whole board and all of a sudden just flip it over and dump all the pieces off of it. I don't know if gamers would be a huge fan of that. So I like this concept. Maybe make it a little quicker game. Maybe have three or four flips. Which again comes back to my idea. I really need 3 or 4-sided cards. That doesn't make sense to anyone else besides me, but if you can do it digitally, right? You have your board and it's laid out, you flip it over, it's spring, flip it over, it's summer, flip it over, it's fall, whereas when you're doing it physically, you have to actually substitute in other boards, which could be interesting. You could have like the spring board next to the fall board, and the spring one becomes summer and then moves into fall, and then fall flips at a certain point. It might be easier to do with cards than boards. But there's some interesting stuff there. The big question becomes, if you're coming to a closed state, how do you continue on the game into the next season without just saying like, oh, everyone count up your points, and now I start the next phase of the game with 200 more points than the person next to me. It can be kind of a negative feeling if we're counting up the points now. It might as well be a separate game, right? So some interesting things to consider. Game biologist, light sensitive board components that only become visible under different wavelengths. Change light sources seasonally. I don't know how to do that physically, But I'm going to actually put that straight into my notes because I don't know if there are games that do that, but that sounds like a super cool concept. I know that there are games that use light in interesting ways. Light and sight. For example, Nyxophobia. I had another friend who was working on something that you actually play in the dark with, I think, like a flashlight that has some reflective or glow-in-the-dark elements. That's pretty cool. Like the food animals in Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 2. Did I watch that? I think I was going to watch that. Seasonal change equals migrations. Yeah. Migrations. Ooh. This. I have an idea related to that, but let me see what else is going on here. Game biologist says, I know a falconer who was working on making a Cooper's hawk combined with Geyer falcon hybrid and was running into challenges since their breeding timing isn't the same. Oh my gosh. I have to copy this down too because these fantastic nuggets are the kinds of things that lead to a really cool framework for a game. I like when there's some science behind it. You know, if you do have an actual breeding game and someone might ask you mechanically, you know, oh, why are there seasons in it? Why does this matter? And you can bring up tidbits like this to say, oh, it's actually a real world thing. That's really cool. Jaws, fight the shark and fight the mayor. Yeah. The mayor screwed it all up. A lichen is a symbiotic combo of a plant, algae, and a fungus, which is more closely related to animals than plants. Interesting. So that's super cool. This is why I love science, where a lichen is two things. A lichen is both a plant, because I've looked at lichens before, right? It looks like just a weirder type of moss. The idea that it is a plant and a fungus at the same time, like both of them coexisting together, is really cool. All right, so I'm going to sidebar for a quick moment to this idea of flippable boards and seasonal migrations. Flipping the entire board and erasing the game state seems a little dramatic, worth potentially playing around with, but completely erasing everyone's work could be a little bit problematic. Unless you had a system where, as I mentioned, you're putting stuff on the board, and then towards the end of the round, you're taking it off. Maybe you have your own store piles, so instead of necessarily checking just the score state, you've stored up stuff between the rounds. Could be a potential workaround for that. Talking about migrations, though, and working cards or tiles into it instead of necessarily a whole flippable board would be cool if you had like a sort of migration path like this. And the cards evolve seasonally, so they're face down at the start, but you go through the different seasons and you have spheres for them actually going through a physical journey. So these cards could be laid out here. And the next ones as well. You don't know exactly which cards are going to show up, so it could be exploration, but exploration through time. So that could be pretty cool. It could be done either way. It could be a migration game, like an animal migration game, or a human migration game. Be interesting to see the differentiation of the gameplay based on those two things. Cards can be four-sided if you use top, bottom, and front back. Yeah. You can definitely get a lot of multi-use and have things pack a lot of information onto a card. I still like the flip, the dramatic reveal. I think there's a lot of value in there. We have a new viewer, Chris Glein. I don't know who this person is. Maybe a replacement for one of our previous viewers who potentially had a different handle. It's basically how Palm Island pulls off four-sided cards with the top, bottom, front, back. You can do it, especially if you cover up part of the card or have part of it tucked under the board. I know Palm Island uses the box as well. Ooh. More information about falconry mating. Thanks for the link, Game Biologist. I feel like I need to share the falcon sex hat with you. Yes. Probably don't use the falcon sex hat unless you're leaning toward a party game. Yeah. I mean, unless it's a science, use it in biology class, right? Hopefully that's safe for work. Let me just take a look at that link. Wow. Okay. I mean, it's animals, so you can say you're just doing you're doing research. But that I have to dig more into that after the stream because this is a very fascinating development. I'm learning a lot about animal mating habits. Cool. So we have a few ideas here starting to germinate and frizzen together. I like the double-sided boards. I also like, for a little less dramatic of undoing of a game state, this idea of migration through different seasons. I think it could also have a very nice table presence. And could be a thing, depending on how you do it, spring, if it is an animal, migration, caring for the young, summer, eating and play, and then fall, breeding and next generation. My one concern about doing a game like this, when you say like caring for and protecting your young, the flip side of that is unsuccessfully caring for and nurturing your young, which means that they die. And if I have like a little aurochs meeple or a gazelle meeple or elephant or whatever, and it's like, oh no, you didn't have enough food, this one died, I think that would be really hard for me emotionally as a designer or as a player to reconcile. Like, oh, it's just a game, don't worry about it too much, and like, oh, but they're dead now, and I would just be thinking about that the whole game. So maybe they just the same with Magic, playing cards like Resolute Watchdog, where you actually sacrifice the animal to protect something else, can be a little hard emotionally. But maybe they don't die. Maybe they just go to a nap, or maybe if you can't feed them, helpful stork comes along and brings them to the happy place where all animals are fed. You just don't get points for them. It's safe for my work. Are you game biologists working with bird matings or biology in games? My latest design has an option for bears to be removed from the game. It's been interesting to hear how both adults and kids interpret that. This is an interesting sidebar when dealing with using either humans or animals mechanically. You know, it is something to be considered in wars or fights. I think, what was the game that I was playing? I think it was, oh shoot, I'm forgetting now. The Switch game that I was really frustrated with. Anyways, you go into combat and there's this dog, Caesar, and the dog is one of the generals in the army, but when the dogs or any of the dogs lose in a fight, they actually just run away. I think there's, like with Pokemon is a great example of that as well, right? You're doing fights, but you're not killing each other. Just one of the creatures becomes exhausted or tired or runs away or something. So there's definitely ways to work around that. It depends. Maybe this sort of emotional impact is something you're interested in having in your game, where the part of the meaningfulness of the game comes from protecting these creatures that you are meant to care for. Animal Devise has stopped me from using a bunch of cute themes. Yeah? It puts a different weight on it for sure. Agency, wildlife, biologist, game designer. That's super cool. I've had to tell people on the phone a lot of times the Circle of Life ain't just a Disney song. But in a very sympathetic way. It's a hard but necessary message for us. Yeah, I'm like, animals eat other animals. That's something that they gloss over. Is especially relevant looking at the new trailers for the live action Lion King. I think it becomes more evocative when you see realistic looking giraffes and baboons and different types of animals kneeling to this predator who is eventually going to eat a lot of them because it's their duty to maintain the populations. It's very Thanos-like, right? If you think about it, it's like, oh, we got to cull the populations to make sure there's balance in the universe. I'm just throwing that out there. Circle of Life. Wow, this is taking a slightly darker turn. So it does, like, we can play with the seasons and have actual young animals and mating and breeding, but you could also steer clear of that if you don't want to worry too much about like the actual circle of life, and have it be more about a journey. And that's an interesting design decision too. In the service of making a play experience, you want to soften certain things. You don't want to pretend these things don't exist. Like in reality or in the real world, it's important to be aware of how things work. But in the magic circle of the game, you have a choice as a designer for how much of quote-unquote reality you put into your game. And it can make a very different experience based on your choices. So it can be a very weighty and impactful decisions that you're making there. Senior Bob says, I have an Amazon River themed game with local predators. They occasionally encounter each other and one is left over, so in the rules I say one drives off the other. You see, that's a place where you can make that choice in order to make your game not accessible necessarily, but especially if you're making something that's family themed, kid themed, or something that mechanically could be played by young people. I think it's very important that young people are aware of, you don't have kids growing up who really think that lions eat lettuce. I think it's important at a certain point to be aware of real world or real reality, but people learn this at different ages. I think it's important for parents to be able to control some of what their kids are exposed to. So in your game, if you have it, say, for example, with these Amazon predators, the two lions meet each other. One rips out the other's intestines and munches upon them. Yeah, it might be realistic, but, not necessarily what you're going for from your game experience. Or maybe it is. Like, there's definitely a broad range of play experiences that we can tap into, which is the both the benefit and the challenge and responsibility as a designer, which I think is really cool. So we're talking a little bit about, I'm going to make sure I write these down because I think these are pretty cool ideas. Double-sided season boards, or this reminds me a little bit of Fall of Magic too, which is a storytelling role-playing game where you unroll the map over time to reveal the regions. Obviously, with being a physical object, the shape of the map doesn't change, but it's cool to go through the revelation and the exploration. Or seasonal cards that reveal over time. So we could do animal migration. There's also a couple of other things that we've talked about over the course of the show that could be based on seasons and the unraveling. Because I like, in my head, seeing this unrolling, revealing of the season cards over time. Could be animal migration, or it could be a gathering game. So as you're going through, I love food. I feel like half the time my game designs come back to this, but you're gathering, you're going through, and you have the different foods that you're gathering based on what season it is. So like greens in the spring, berries in the summer, and then fruits, like tree fruits, in the fall. I like this idea of this evolving season map where you're poking out towards the edges of it. Ooh, okay. I'm seeing a thing now. If you have the season decks, oh, this could actually be really cool visually. So one deck for each season. And they're slightly tuned either at the overlaps between the deck, or you don't know exactly how many cards are in each season. And they're stacked one on top of each other in a way that there's a point where you don't know where it's summer, or you could have it becomes summer cards somewhere near the bottom of the spring deck. So all of a sudden you're not flipping over spring cards anymore. You have to... so you're going out in directions, you're moving physically, but moving through spring. Gathering all these different things. You have your cubes or your workers or whatever going to these different locations, and then all of a sudden somebody triggers summer because enough time has progressed, and then everybody has to move on to the next summer card. And there could be an interesting consequence there with push your luck. Because at that point, all the greens are gone. So if you're going towards a certain set collection, like you might stay on your card, trying to tap into a very... like maybe you come upon a glen that has a lot of certain type of greens, and you might stay on there, but then not have the benefit of making progression through the map. So that could be a really cool implementation of that. So this idea of gathering, and then we talked earlier about rituals. So either, or both, maybe. There's like a double-sided, ooh, I like that. Gathering components for rituals. Gathering food. Gathering components for rituals or foods. So again, you're going... Rituals could work because there could be a drop-off point. It's like you have to do your ritual on the solstice or at the right point during the course of the game. But the more you gather, the better your ritual will be. So there could be a little bit of push your luck element, and then you wait too long, it's summer, and you didn't have your ritual, and that's really bad. Game Biologist says, I'm mostly designing with the classroom in mind now, and leaving animals' fates more open is great for fostering discussions about what realistically might be happening. Some players go to it died, while others decide it got moved to a better habitat. I love that combo happens. Yeah, that's especially if you're speaking in a educational context, then you have a whole other level that you're dealing with. It's very important to be aware. I haven't designed for classrooms myself, but I would imagine that there's very specific regional regulations that teachers are very aware and parents are very aware and want to make sure that they have some control over what the children are being exposed to. And also having the conversations, I think, is great. You know, you could say like, oh, you're not being realistic by saying exactly what happened, but sometimes you don't know. Like, sometimes the animal does get moved or runs away. You know, it's not necessarily that they're dying. So especially from a science context, I love the idea of design evoking these conversations and using games to get kids excited about this. Spreading of plant seeds. It could be greens in spring. So this idea of a gatherer mentality where you're just going around berries in summer, fruits in fall. But as Senor Bao mentioned, the spreading of seeds. So that could be more of you're sowing, you're reaping what you sow. So over the first course of the game, this one, the idea of moving through space and time over the course of seasons is a little bit more exploratory, but the movement could be more metaphorical, where you're moving through time, but physically staying in the same space. So you're replaying out the same locations that you were in, only over the course of planting or harvesting. So that could be cool. Having the same concept of moving into, it's probably not going to be as much of a tree. If you look at it that way, it might be each person has a circle or collection of items where you're planting on fields, for example. Fields. And then you're evolving outwards for there to represent the time vector. Sidebar, I really like this idea of revelation related more to time than space. I think there's a lot of games that do exploratory tile exploration through as movement through space. Movement through time as opposed to space. So I like that. And then you're coming back. Oh, that could actually, from a layout perspective, if you're thinking about stacking tiles or cards, that could be pretty cool. Where you build out your farm from a central hub, and then, and we could come back to the double-sided cards here, as long as we still had a vector for randomization, but they could all start as spring cards, and then flip them over to the fall, summer side. Either have it two-sided, flip it over to the summer side, maybe cover them up with fall cards that are revealed, or have them be single-sided and cover up each of them. So I have my plant cards here. So these are all the fields that I've sown stuff into. And I still have my same plot, but now they're all face-down cards in the same location, and then I have to go back through. So it has this very nice, repetitive, cyclical feeling to it, which I really like. Because this is a way we had talked in the beginning of kind of climax and denouement where, you know, you're building out this stuff and then you come back into the center. So you've laid your plan or your engine, and then you come back, and then you start to reveal things again, and then you come back. And having this sort of a gameplay loop seems like it could be very satisfying, as long as you don't make it so, oh, I made 10 plots and you made 5, so you have a lot less to do, or you're going to have a lot less meaningful decisions over the course of the next game. So think about it even more mechanically. Like, you might have a certain number of slots. Like, I have 8 here. So maybe you have 8 slots and you're going to put 8 things there, but they might be a sewn field, you might double sew it, you might do tools. I don't know. There's a lot of cool stuff there. Tile-laying game of a pioneering plant species spreading its population to a new habitat. Okay. Hold the phone. I like that. Man, game biologist, you are really hitting things on the nose today. You're like rocking this stream. Because we're talking about a couple of different directions that we could go with this concept. Either humans planting things and sowing those things, moving out, gathering materials for either food or ritual and doing those rituals. And now this idea of a plant species. So it's not you're a human trying to plant things, more typical, growing wheat or whatever, but you are a plant spreading its seeds. And then you could do something interestingly competitive with occupying spots. There could potentially be a cooperative competitive element. Maybe you could choose to symbiosis with another plant species and you each get a benefit from it. Symbiosis. I want to make a note here for Rising Sun Tea ceremony, which I think is a really cool cooperative, competitive mechanic where at the beginning of each phase you have a chance to ally with specifically one other person. And you can break that alliance at points during the game. But having something, one of the key points of that mechanic is that you each get benefits from that. So you get to do potentially twice as many actions depending if there's a break in the allegiance. So that could be a cool way to work with other people. I guess it's a little photosynthesis. So in photosynthesis, you're you're a type of tree and you're trying to, or you're the person planting the trees. You're trying to grow your trees bigger so you can block the light from other plants and get the most light points. But I think there's enough space in there to be more from the perspective of the plants. Like you embody this plant species and grow out from there. Fun part of plant life cycles is that it's not unusual for them to age and senesce over time. So the place you started loses the species while new young plants expand at the periphery of its growing area. That's a new vocabulary word for me, senesce. I need to look this up because that sounds like a cool thing and I want to know what that means. Age and senesce, is that like dying or spreading their seeds potentially? And that makes a lot of sense too because with the plants, if you're going into the same space spreading your seeds, then you're going to have a lot of competition there. So that's why a lot of plants have methods either using seeds that fly in the wind or using animals that will carry their seeds far away, putting the seeds in fruit that animals will eat and defecate out, moving the seeds, because as a plant, like, you don't really want other plants in your space. You don't want your baby plants to be close to each other because they're going to be competing for resources. They can't move around like animals can. So I'm going to write down that vocabulary word. Senesce, get old and die. Huh. That is a cool world. It's a cool word. Yeah, so that could be looking a little bit more into the physical biology of it. I think some of it could be worked into the mechanics as long as it still works mechanically, but use a little bit of science behind it, which can be cool, where you get more benefit from moving out. Whereas if you're getting in the same spaces, you have declining population and sometimes your own plants might start to kill each other off. Plants competitively spreading your seeds, because that's the thing about photosynthesis. I haven't had a chance to play it yet, but I believe that it's a little more about, like, there aren't a ton of limitations to where you can place your trees. You can block light from yourself, I believe, so that does capture that mechanic. Need to spread out to survive. Maybe you can be symbiotic with other plants. Rising sun, tea. Ceremony. Cool. All right. I wasn't sure where this one was going to go. We got some really good ideas out of this. I have potentially 3 ideas that I'm fairly excited about delving into. The gathering one seems cool. You're moving out over space and time. The spreading of seeds, growing out your plot or your farm, and then growing stuff out, coming back in, having this rhythmic game loop to it seems really cool. And then plants competitively spreading your seeds. Like, yeah, I want to be a plant. I want to role play as, like, the pitcher plant or the Venus flytrap that captures the insects and maybe gives nutrients that I receive from that to my co-plant. I think that could be super cool. Yeah. Came up with lots of really exciting, interesting ideas today. So the next part of this stream is generally the prototyping part. I was looking back. Usually I go from talking about the new idea and let these concepts germinate, to use a plant word, a little bit and foment over time, because it can be tricky to leap right into prototyping. Often, if you let ideas settle for a little bit, you can come up with some more interesting stuff, or really settle on an idea that is the most interesting and exciting one to you. Last week's, as I mentioned before, last week's stream was a little loopy. We had the rolling of components idea, but it didn't quite coalesce into a game. So for my prototyping portion, I'm not going to stay too long because I actually have some testing to do tonight, but I'm going to at least pull up the screen, show you what I'm working on, and discuss a little bit the actual both play testing and creation of the cards. Alright, so let's see if we can get window. Alright, can we just get the Photoshop window in here? If I hide the Chrome one, it seems to be a little bit mad about Photoshop, so let's just do that. Manually, window, Photoshop, design. I need to go through and hone my OBS at some point because I have about 1 million different things that I have created. All right, for some reason, it seems to be a little bit mad about Photoshop. So let me just restart this. The game, by the way, if you're interested, that we're working on at the moment is called Merge, is the working title of this game. The concept came to me just randomly. I was playing a lot of Merge Dragons. As I've mentioned recently, it became very addictive. The gameplay loop of that is just insane. You can combine 3 of a particular item, whether it's a dragon egg or a flower or a plant. Physically, it's a mobile game. So you physically drag them together on the grid, and it makes a better item of that. And the pyramids for these things, the tiers, is insane. So and then you need 3 to 5 of those items to make a better one. So you're just looping through over and over again, like combining the things, getting the better thing, combining the things, getting the better thing. It sounds like not that interesting, but the feedback loop and the endorphin drip of like, hey, I got a better thing just from moving things across a grid was a very satisfying experience. All right, let's get this dragged below all the cameras. Cool. All right, I'm back. Hello. So we have the Merge game here. I've also been thinking and talking to people who are interested in auto chess and potentially making board game versions of auto chess, which is another one. It's less about spatially combining things like Merge Dragons is, and more about you just have 3 of a kind and poof, it becomes a better thing of that. I talked to people a little bit on social media about whether that made sense. Like if I have, like, what physically would make sense to combine to make a better thing. It's like if I combine 3 cats, it turns into a tiger. I don't know. It's a weird thing because it doesn't really make sense, but it seems to be a kind of a natural thing to do. So I'm rolling with it, seeing what kind of stuff I can come up with from that. So for this, my layers are going again. You can't really see my layers here. I'm gonna hide my face for a second. So my idea for combining things that kind of made a little sense, where I went elemental with the game. So for example, I have the other difference between something like an auto chess or a Merge Dragons is you have choices what the things merge into. So there's a draft element, you're getting cards. If you ever have 3 of a type in your realm, they automatically smush together and you get to choose the one on the next tier. I had an idea of kind of going through a physical elemental direction. So for example, 3 flames can turn into a volcano or a hearth, kind of branching in that tree. 3 hearths can change into, let's see what I had here, can change into a forge or a meteor, and 3 volcanoes can turn into a sun or a meteor. So there's choices, and at a certain point the tiers converge so that you have can go back. Ooh, bring back my face. There we go. So as you're going within the reverse pyramid of this decision tree, there's some that will intersect, which was a pretty interesting concept. Mechanically, you actually have all the cards laid out. So the nice thing of a Merge Dragons or an auto chess is all of the computation is done in the back. You don't have to have the things they can evolve into. It's like evolution a little bit as well. You don't have to have those all laid out. With a physical game, I do actually have the pyramids laid out so you can see what all your options are, which can be a little bit of a mental overload. This game is still very early stage, but it's interesting. So I'm doing some more tests, seeing at this stage if it's going to turn into a game or if it's just going to be chaos. And never there a game shall be. So at first, when I first tested this game, I had those tier 3 cards that things evolve into be the actual scoring conditions, so you're drafting into your scoring conditions. That became pretty chaotic. I also had all your cards you drafted were in your realm, and all these cards are draft modifiers. So, for example, if we go down into the wave cards, I think rock. See +1 card per draft per rock. So if you're drafting, don't have any other modifiers, you're drafting 4 cards, you'll pick 2, now you'll see 5 cards, and pick 2 from that. So you have a little more choice. As things evolve, they're going to go into the communal, so it's like a communal deck builder. The cards are going to go into the communal pile, so you might be getting more and more valuable cards in there over time. Anything that you're merging out of will be made available for other people. So choosing your scoring conditions was a little crazy. Instead, I changed that to be, I have my rock card here, scoring cards. They're going to come out randomly at the beginning of the game with a welcome to scoring where the first person to do it gets points, second person gets some points, so that if you're going into something and someone snatches from you, it's a little less punishing. So I have my cards. Oh, also art for this. This was the first one. A couple of weeks ago I started using the Noun project, and I mentioned that on stream. So when we have the cards, like the monument one with the art, it looks like a robot, I know. All came from the Noun project, which is pretty cool. So I made my scorers. This is where the game gets a little complex. I'm taking the scoring away from the tier 3 cards. So the original draft pile is all tier 1 cards. If you get 3 of those, you can evolve into a tier 2 card. If you have 3 of those in your realm, you can evolve into a tier 3 card. All your cards that you draft are going to be face up in your realm. I recently made a change where there's going to be a backcountry and a seat of power. So, because they're all draft modifiers, if you have 7 out at a time, it can be a lot to keep track of. So I want you to be able to choose which cards are active on a given round. And that way you can hone your draft a little bit. So, with all the tier 1 and tier 2 cards being draft modifiers, I wanted to make the tier 3 cards be realm modifiers. So these actually can modify your scoring or modify your realm depending on what strategy you want to go into. I'm actually going to get out my notebook here because that has, it's a little washed out, but I'll have it here anyway so we can go into what we're considering for these cards. So when I say realm modifiers, it's basically play space. So if you can think of a game where you have items stored or a storage component or a hand limit, you don't have a hand in this game, everything is open and available, so this is where you put your stuff. Alright. Tuning back into the chat, Senor Baub says, there's a little indie game called Run, Squirrel, or Die you might want to check out. It's a 2-phase tile game where your squirrel is hiding and then retrieving nuts. I do want to check that out. You are correct. Run, Squirrel, or Die. I can see why that's an indie game, because that's definitely a very potentially divisive hiding and gathering nuts. Gameologist says, only real world merging thing I can think of is learning. 3 facts is a concept, 3 concepts is a theory, 3 theories is a chapter, 3 chapters is a course, 3 courses is a minor, and on and on. Just hope you don't get trapped in the end with 3 postdocs and no escape. I understand. that's a hot take right there. I understand that happens a lot in academia. Too many postdocs. Yeah, it's weird if you think about it from a real world concept. But again, like, I think I'm thinking about this too much. Like, aren't most mechanics weird if you think of them from a real world concept? Like worker placement. You're like, oh, it's just like you're hiring someone to do a job. It's like, yeah, but you're literally taking a generic functionless worker piece and saying, like, you do this now. And then you might be like, someone might bump you. It's like, oh, you're not doing that anymore. Or it's like, you do this now. So it's less workers and more like robots, like generic units of labor. Or like deck building, if you try and say what's happening. All these concepts of trashing and the actions that you're taking don't necessarily make literal sense. So I think it's good to think about to see if there's ways you can touch back into reality to make a game more easily grokkable. I think what I have now with the elements, even if it doesn't make logical sense, if I were to sit down and debate, like, does three villages become a planet or whatever it is that I have for my tiers, or do 3 villages become a monument? It doesn't make sense, but it's evocative enough where you can learn the language of the game more quickly instead of having it just be just the mechanics on the card. I wanted to put some symbology in there to make it a little easier, even for playtesting, because I think you don't want to get too much into the UI for playtests because it's easy to get wrapped up in there. Again, I don't know if this is going to be a game, if it's going to come together, but at the same time, if your playtesters can't grok it, it becomes very hard to test. Alright, anyway, so I'm modifying my tier 3 cards so that they affect realms. Seat of Power, +2 slots per monument. Oh, that's another place where this game really gets crazy. Everything is meant to be draft modifiers, but cumulative. So it's not just like, oh, if I have rocks, my draft changes in this way. It's like if I have 1 rock, I see +1 card. If I have 2 rocks, I see +2 cards. So I might be seeing 6 cards and doing 2 drafts. And yeah, it all gets a little bit chaotic. All right. The other nice thing about putting a little bit of theme on this game is in my different reverse pyramids, I have a gameplay concept wrapped up in that. So the rock is meant to be simple, slow, steady growth over time. So it makes a lot of sense to have the tier 3 rock cards actually modify the realm, just give you more stuff over time. For the wave cards, it's more about manipulation, filtering, tricksy strategy. And then or strategic, I guess I would say. For the flame cards, of course, these are the ones, chaos, lets you draw random cards. There's a little bit of a steal element to it, so having a theme, even if it doesn't end up being the final one, can push you a little bit into a direction of these things. All right, monument, seat of power, +2 slots per monument. For the tier 3, I'm looking at it as a potential end game condition, like the first person to have 3 tier 3s ends the game. So I don't see people having multiples of these. Numbers I'm not quite sure about, but we're going to say for now. Sure, +2 slots in your seat of power, which is your actual draft modifiers. I'm thinking of starting with 2, which might be a little low, but we can balance some of those numbers in the future. My other note for this was backcountry. Yeah, so you have your realm, your seat of power, and your backcountry. +3 3 slots. I was going to start at 6, so 50% more seems sure. Slots per village. And that kind of makes sense thematically. The monument, you're getting more seat of power. The village, you're getting more backcountry. Yeah, so that makes sense. And then for the planet, thinking of another way to affect the realm. Senior Bob says, I'm dabbling with recruiting specific worker types. I'm trying to think if there are a lot of games that do that. Yeah, I would say the game that I'm developing right now, Phil's game that I'm eventually going to publish, Scrapture, it's cards that you're placing instead of meeples, but they are like workers. They can generate more workers, or they have special abilities. I think it's a little more common in card-based games than in meeple or cube only games, because you need some sort of way to represent the roles of the different cards. Pitch logic out the window, says Game Biologist. Any tiny thing can grow into any bigger thing. Can go with a bunch of different emotional feels from serious to silly based on the objects you choose. You see, that's great. I think that's... I got very focused. I mean, because merged dragons doesn't make any sense. Like, 3 baby dragons becomes a bigger dragons. Like, that's not how animals work. Rocks become a bigger rock. 3 little plants become a tree. It doesn't make sense, but it's something... Not everything that is grokkable or that catches makes sense, I think is a great way to put it. Pokemon evolve, which makes no sense. Yeah, evolution, right? It's like, because I'm using the term for this merge games, like, oh, it evolves into better things, which probably came from Pokemon or similar games where you have things evolve, but it's like, that's not how evolution works. That's a very problematic stance on evolution, right? It's like, well, this bird used to be a dragon, is a bird now. Oh my gosh, it's like in Super Mario Brothers, the movie, I think has a great example of the like evolution ray or something. It's a good movie, by the way. I remember enjoying it as a child. I don't know why everybody knocks on it so much. Okay, so we're making our seat of power bigger. We're making our backcountry bigger. I'm thinking of something just for the realm itself, for moving cards more easily. So each round you're going to have the option to move cards between your backcountry and your seat of power. So in our realm, we're starting out with a total of 8 cards if we're doing 2 or 3 and 5. 3 in the seat of power, 5 in the backcountry. We have a card that modifies the seat of power and a card that modifies the backcountry. Maybe something about your realm being unlimited, that you no longer discard cards from your realm. I kind of like that. So you're not discarding cards. It seems powerful, especially because just increasing, like, it just seems strictly better having unlimited if you're not then having these specific things that increase the size of one or the other. But potentially, if there's a downside to it, so the cards in your realm are unlimited, but cards, it like adds a new, I'm just spitballing here, adds a new domain to your realm. cards there don't merge. Adds a new domain to your realm. The prison. I'm totally coming up with these ideas on the spot, so I'm thinking very hard here. So adds a new domain to your realm. Prison, cards there don't merge. Can't be moved. Okay. So there's limits to your realm at the start of the game. You can't, if you get extra cards in there, then you have to discard cards if you're drafting too many cards, unless you draft up into one of these that make your realm bigger. But if we have this one, because there's some point scoring conditions where you just want a lot of cards for stuff, so I don't know if that's going to work, but this is good for now. This is an interesting direction. So talking about this, the rock pyramid, everything is about modifying the usage of the realm and the size of the realm. All right, so onwards and forwards to the wave cards. So let me show real quick. Yeah, some of these cards, they'll have discard effects. So they have very powerful effects. For example, draft a whole extra time can be very useful. But there's a downside to keep these things balanced. So you have to discard a card. The tier 1 lets you take another card from your draft pool, but you have to discard something from your back country. I'm going to change that. So for the tier 3 cards, I want to work to negate some of those downsides and to further improve your filtering effects. So for the water tier 3, this one went away. When you discard, keep one. Oops, I don't know where that is. Discard, keep one card per waterfall. So there's a couple of times when you discard. If you're discarding from your realm because you have too many cards in your realm, then you might get rid of multiple cards. When you merge, it counts as a discard, so you get rid of 3 cards. So having a waterfall will help to negate some of those discard effects, which seems like a pretty useful and thematic ability for the wave pyramid. America Team HPR, hello, welcome. We are in the prototyping phase of our game design stream. Been going since about 4, probably not going to hang out too much longer because I want to bang out these cards and get them printed for a test later today, but we'll definitely be here for a few more minutes. Senior Bob says, I have a bunch of meeples of different colors. They could also be different shapes. I think the different shape part is definitely good. If there's some way, or not even meeples necessarily. For example, if a worker can be the shape of the action, like a shape of a shovel for dig, or even have a screen printing or a stickering to it, anything that can make it super readable. You can also have a section of the board with the meeple supplies that has the action right there. I think it's important to make sure that it's very easy, because worker placement, the nice simplicity about it is I just take any of these pieces and I put it, sometimes it's shaped like a meeple or it's a little space. It's like I put my meeple there. And that's a very nice UI that goes along with that. Game Bowler says, but birds did used to be dragons, or at least dinosaurs. Every tiny sparrow is descended from giant predatory beasts, and it remembers this at a genetic level. I like that. Oh my gosh, yeah. Especially the seagulls. We have a lot of seagulls around here, and they definitely are dinosaurs at heart. Like, they look you in the eyes, they're like, I remember being a Tyrannosaurus. I want to eat your face instead of just your sandwich. Senator Baub, 3 comments, asteroids make a planet. Not quite. I mean, it is a little weird. I have the tree here is looking a little bit weird. So 3 rocks is tier 1 for the rock pyramid. 3 rocks makes a land in a generic country or a home. So it's going in 2 different directions there. I have a little bit of symbology. Can you see the mouse here? Yeah, you can see it. I have a little bit of symbology here on the cards to make it easier to see what becomes what. So for the homes, it either becomes a monument or a village, which I think makes a fair amount of sense. A land becomes a planet or a monument. So, sense a little bit. For the flame cards, though, 3 volcanoes becomes a meteor because big enough volcano shoots a rock into space and just hand wave it. Or a sun. That's probably the most aspirational of my merges. 3 volcanoes becomes the sun in my beautiful fantasy world that we have here. Anyways, moving right along. When did I change the opacity of that? I must have pressed a button. I'm like, why is it so light? So waterfalls, discard, keep 1 card per waterfall. I think that kind of makes sense. Fountains. Let's tap into our lower levels of cards down here. What do we have? Well is draft an extra, so you get a whole extra draft for this. Lake, merge happens at 1 less card per lake. So instead of being 3 to merge, if you have a lake, it's 2 to merge. And if you have 2 lakes, it becomes 1 to merge. So it just automatically goes up the pyramid, which might be a little broken. But with the discarding, hopefully balance that out a little bit. So a lake can become a waterfall or an ocean. The well can become a waterfall or a fountain. So what? Okay. So our rock tier 3 cards are modifying the realm. Our wave tier 3 cards are modifying the modified draft. So potentially getting rid of some of the downsides. That could be an interesting one. The merge happens in your hand, or reveal your hand to trigger a merge in your hand. That could be super broken. I don't know if revealing your hand, so it could merge right there, and then you're taking the cards out of it. I don't know, that sounds pretty crazy, but maybe. Genuine murder bird demo. I don't know if I want to click on that. Is it like actual murder bird or more like eyes, I'm gonna murder you? Sure, let's try that. Reveal your draft hand to trigger a merge in hand. Seems crazy. Draft hand once per round to trigger a merge in hand. And I don't know if that's more of a wave card than maybe a flame card. But we'll leave it there. We're just coming up with some ideas now. Seeing what we can do. So we had some of the realm stuff in the rock pyramid. I want to have a little bit of flexibility in the water pyramid, because the idea is you don't need as many cards necessarily to do the merges, but it could also get a little bit weird. I like the theme too, because I'm tapping into ideas of like fluidity, movement. Maybe, for example, you can move things between any domains, and maybe this could break the prison rule a little bit, which could be cool. And also if you're moving cards between domains based on your draft, that could be cool. Move during draft. During draft, move two cards per ocean between any domains. Okay. That could be a cool effect. So if because the idea is at the beginning of each round, you're going to set up what's in your seat of power, what's in your backcountry, maybe put some cards in your prison if you have one of those. So this one you can start to move cards around between that. So that seems pretty thematic to this water ability. Alright, so let's just burn through these flame cards real quick, and then that'll be just about ready to print out and test, which is the main goal for all of this. Alright, for our flames, oh yeah, this was going to be score modification. So again, flames are meant to be tricksy, manipulative. So the first one is going to be score the... Ooh. So what do we have? We have Sun, Forge. Oh, I just came up with one for Meteor. When merged, I don't really have a merge effect thing. When merged, replace a scoring card. So I like that idea of destruction. So whether or not anyone's scored it yet, just like totally get rid of it. I don't know if that's powerful enough, but I like that thematically. Forge. What do we have? Forge and Sun. I mean, it could be Sun too. I like this being a little more crafty. So score the first player amount. First player points. If second player to meet conditions. Alright, let's head over to the scoring cards real quick, because I don't think we looked at those too closely. So here's an example of a scoring card. 10 points for the first player, 5 points for the second player, and then no points thereafter. For a full pyramid, so at least one of each of 6 cards in one pyramid. Points are not at all balanced for this right now, but here's a random assortment of these each game are going to be what people are going towards. So for the tier 3 flame cards, to be able to take those 10 points, even if you're the second player, I think can be a very interesting effect. Merge, replace a scoring card, or just get rid of something. So if you're just like, if none of the cards are good for you, or even as like a attack thing, if someone's about to get something, could be a little punishing, but we'll see that during playtests. Score the first player, and for this one, the Sun, I wanted to be score the second player amount anytime. And I'd said multiple times, so that could be a little too broken. So this one, as long as it's out there, normally you'd have, say, 4 scoring cards out. Over the course of the game, they'd be scored, and maybe more would be revealed if all of the conditions were met and the game was still progressing. But for this power in particular, break that rule. Like, you can just work really slowly towards all the point stuff. So that seems like a potentially cool effect. Oh no, I moved my guide. I should lock those things down. It's safer work, trust me. Okay, game biologist, I'll take your word for it. We have a murder bird demo here in the chat if anyone is interested in checking out some murder birds on Twitter. Senior Baub. So dumb theme idea. I love dumb theme ideas. This is awesome. There are temples of different elementals, and the more effigies changes what the temple is about. I could see that. Man, I need to get my actual rules doc up here. Now that I have so many documents going on, I'm like, I don't have my rules doc open for the merge game because I need to make all these changes in it. But I'll definitely make a note of that because I like that. Ideas of temples and rituals I think is really fun. And interesting. Alright, so it's been a productive day. We came up with at least 3 game concepts. I don't even know which one of these are going to work on. I still need to work on the Truth of Science dinosaur game. And then I've got this merge game and a few other concepts that are just coming to fruition, which I'm really excited about. Lots of irons in the fire, lots of cool stuff coming about. Now I just gotta sit down and make all these prototypes so I can get them tested, because that's really what it's all about. I mean, I can sit here and draw silly doodles, even mock things up in Photoshop until the cows come home, or the lichens, or the murder bird dinosaur sparrows, but that won't end up as a game until I can actually get it in front of people, self-tested at first to see that the basics are there, and then go on to test it with other people to make sure that it's not just too fiddly or just an exciting concept in my head. Anyways, it's been lovely being here today with you all. This is super helpful for me coming up with new game ideas, being able to bounce them off you. I wouldn't have come up with these awesome ideas without you all here in the chat. And it's also just a good exercise for being able to get those creative juices flowing. So if you're going to do this for yourself, either if you're going to stream it, it's great. Or if you're just going to sit down in front of your computer, do some doodles, come up with some ideas, post them on Twitter, get feedback on Twitter. Even if you have a million ideas that you're working on, it can be really useful to do something lighter like this that you don't have any weight on. Like, I have ideas in my Trello board that I'm really excited about and think can be really good games, and there's a lot of pressure on those. But all these ideas that come out of the brainstorms, I have no expectations for them. So it can be a very a lighter, less stressful way to design games. Anyways, I'm here every week on Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific time. Also stream some Magic on Fridays, and potentially going to start some more shows depending on when I get more time to get stuff up, because I'd love to do more board game playing and more physical prototyping as well once I get my setup put together. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun chatting here with you, and hope to see you again next week. Have a great rest of your week. Thanks for joining. And we are out.